and as a React person, like I've learned this lesson the hard way with React so many times. Like it's the same thing. Like, how do I do this the React way? How do I satisfy React's like paradigm and opinions on things? And sometimes you spend so much time trying to figure that out that you forget to even go back to the basics and look like, what is the web way? Like, what are the web APIs that would enable me to do this thing? And that's going back to the topic at hand. Like, that's another reason I really enjoy learning about new web APIs, because oftentimes you can solve your problems with way less code, with way less complexity, by just reaching for web APIs for things that otherwise seem really complicated.
Join Ben Lesh, Tracy Lee, and Adam Rackis as they talk with Chance Strickland about new web APIs, CSS, RSC, and Tailwind.
Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of the Modern Web Podcast. My name is Tracy. You can follow me on Twitter at LadyLeet. I am joined by Ben Lesh, Adam Rackis, and Chance Strickland. This is the first time I've ever said your name out loud, Chance. So did I pronounce it right?
You did. It's a very generic white person name, so you did great.
Yeah. Thank you.
Chance isn't that generic. Strickland is like the name of like every other principal in America, though.
Yeah, but Chance is also not even possible to mispronounce. Like, people say it wrong. They'll say the wrong word. They'll say Chase or Chad. Oh yeah, if you're British, I guess. Like, but that just sounds kind of regal. So I like that too.
So we're here. So Chance, you've never been on this before, the Modern Web Podcast, but you know, I like to call this like what do I call it? Like tepid takes on hot takes. But maybe we'll be more productive with you here, because, like, you know, we're talking about things like new web APIs and CSS and all the other fun stuff, instead of, you know, I don't know.
No, I will say, like, my hottest take in general is that I think most hot takes are terrible. So that's,
yeah.
You know,
that in itself is a terrible hot take. I don't even know what to think now.
What's the hottest take on the internet right now, where you're like, that
statement just ate itself?
No, I know it's definitely confusing. No, I don't know. I just, like, our industry has a lot of nuance. I mean, I think most of them do, but like, this is the one that I see all the time. So, but yeah, it's just a lot of nuance in pretty much every discussion that gets lost, especially if you're active on Twitter, like all of us are. But it's just, I don't know. Yeah, all the hot takes really just kind of, I just mute them and move on, because most of the time
but tell me what your favorite, your
where's Adam on the other hand?
Your least favorite hot take. What
Rebels and hot takes. I don't know. My least favorite hot take. I don't know. Adam, what's your least favorite hot take as a lover of hot takes?
That RSCs are unfathomably complicated and the worst thing that ever happened, and ruining the web. And I mean, I don't love them like unconditionally, but I think people lose their minds about them too much. Ben, what about you? You can do better than that. I'm not happy with my answer.
I think it's a hot take that RSCs exist. They exist. That's what I know about them, is they're around, and I've seen code examples on the internet, but I've never seen anything in person approximating an RSC. So
I love talking to Ben, because it's like you've been working on these like really hairy low level issues with like all this async work with observables and whatnot. Like, that's sort of where you spend a lot of your time and energy. And so, like, the rest of us are kind of in this like much higher level plane, and you're just like not going to pay attention to the noise, just going to do my work and put my head down.
So there's simpler problems down here.
I don't know about that.
Wait till we release the podcast we're releasing today. The clips that I got from Ben are so good. I have to message him and be like, "Are you okay if I release this?" And he said, "Release whatever you want." So I have it in text message, and now I have him agreeing on video. So,
I mean, there's two types of people with opinions about me in the world right now, which is there's one group that's like, "Oh, Ben Lesh, he's the RxJS guy, and I love Angular and I love observables and blah 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 blah." And then there's a much larger group of people that are like, RxJS is garbage and Ben's old. and I mean, I don't know. They're not.
You're like, I'm old, but I like RSJS. Come on now.
Yeah. I like RxJS. I don't like how people use it sometimes, but I do like it.
So, Chance, APIs. What are you like? Yeah. What are you stoked on right now? What are you watching, playing around with?
Yeah. So, I mean, I got a new job about a year ago. Folks probably have never heard of my company. It's a small startup called Replo. But for folks who don't know about my background, like I did a lot in the open source space before I had moved back to product world. But I was maintaining and working on the library Reach UI, which sort of one of the OG component libraries in React, rooted around accessibility. That project has sort of been superseded by some other projects. Another one that I worked on that superseded Reach was Radix UI. I was on that team for a little while, and then started working full time on Remix. So I've been in the open source zone for a long time and decided that I felt pretty disconnected with that the real world of the development, or what I would call non-developer focused products. And turns out building for developers and non-developers is a very different job in some ways. And so like I started to feel a little disconnected from the rest of the world and wanted to get back in that. So I started I wanted to jump back into a product. So I'm back on a small startup team working on a page builder for Shopify storefronts. And I wanted to tee all that up because in having sort of both sides of that, both perspectives, I've been able to learn and get exposed to a lot of surface area as far as newer web APIs, especially on the framework side. When you build a framework, you really start to dig in, and working at that lower level, you get exposed to what all the web can do nowadays, and so that's really exciting. And another job of mine on the Remix team was showing people what you can do with all of the raw web APIs, because Remix sort of like gives you a foundation to use those, rather than I think a lot of us who work in React, we work with React's abstractions for a lot of things, which are fine and great, but a lot of times you don't necessarily need those abstractions, and you can do a lot with a lot less when you have these great new APIs. So as far as like things that I'm excited about, one of them that this is like kind of basic, and for a lot of people, like I think a lot of people don't even know we have this problem. But when you build dark mode into your website, and let's say you have a React application, your server-side rendering that application, and you have dark mode, you can just use CSS media queries to determine dark and light mode, and that's fine. But somebody on your team comes and says, we want a little toggle on in your header that actually lets the user toggle dark mode in the website. Well, that changes your entire implementation, because now you can't really rely on CSS, because that targets their system preferences, not your little website thing. So you have to implement it entirely differently. And so you go through and you refactor your code, and you add a class to the top level HTML component that says dark mode, and now you sort of switch based on that class. Well, now you have a hydration problem potentially, because on the server you have no idea about any of that. And so the server rendered React HTML is sent down, and you don't have that dark mode class yet. So okay, well, I add a little script tag that adds that. Well, now you have potential hydration errors, because React depends on the server tree being identical to the hydrated tree when it's rendered in the client. And so you now suddenly have a very simple task otherwise that has become infinitely more complex because of how React works. And so we've got all of these really interesting solutions to this problem floating around there on the web. All of them involve way more code than you would expect for such a simple thing. Well, we now actually have potentially a server-side solution to this issue, and that is with client hint headers. And I think this is pretty cool. There are a lot of client hint headers, and this is an experimental tech, by the way. It's not like fully fleshed out or supported across all browsers. But now you can send, the client can send headers to the server to tell you ahead of time what preferences I might have for things like darker light mode, for reduced motion, for all of these different things that we have CSS media queries for. But now we have ways to communicate that to the server, so the server can actually send us back HTML based on that, or server can send back anything based on those preferences. So I think that's potentially really powerful for the very lower level case, or the simple case of just dark mode, like I explained. Like that's a pretty small thing, but you can imagine this API being used for advanced web apps that require lots of motion or animation, and like the server gets a request and can send back a response, basically letting the user know they need to do this, this, and this before they can actually use the application for like you can do a lot with this API potentially. And you now no longer rely on a bunch of client-side code to execute. So I think that's really cool. I will be excited to see that actually supported.
I was going to say the client header thing, just to I mean, I'm asking a question, but also to elaborate for other folks. Like, I think that's a thing where you would literally send like an accepts header, for example. If you're sending a request to an API, you can say accepts application JSON and it'll respond with JSON. You can say accepts text HTML and it responds with HTML. So in this case, you would send like a specialized accepts type header that would say expects dark mode. Is that kind of how that works? And then the server decides what to render based off of that.
Yep, that's exactly right. So server sees that header and responds with a different payload, essentially.
But how do you send it? Like, you open up your browser tab and you go to mywebsite.io.
So the user doesn't send anything. It reads from system preferences. So right now this only works in Chrome, but the idea is that it just is going to send your system preferences over to the server.
It does it automatically for anywhere you go on the web. The browser just sends them so that dark mode can work.
I'm not entirely. I think that's the case. I haven't looked at this in a minute, but I have it implemented on my own website as like a progressive enhancement. But I'm going to take a look at the network tab and just triple check that while we're talking. But yeah, I think it just is. It just comes along with the request, if I'm not mistaken.
The toggle switch thing, I'm sorry,
Cool.
you engineering sniped me. Like, the toggle switch thing is interesting, like, because, if someone toggles it, they're overriding their system settings, right? So that header would mean nothing in that case, and it couldn't affect the header because the header is being sent by the browser. So like, you would have to send. I guess you could send it with cookies, right? Like, you can send a cookie that would be like, hey.
So yeah, with that particular example, the issue I think is sort of the initial render. So if you decide that now I want to use a class on the HTML to determine light or dark mode, I don't know what the first render is supposed to be, and if I want to base the first render on system preferences. So that's maybe I overlooked that part, but that's the kind of the idea, because right now you can say either use system preferences or use this class name on the top of the HTML to determine dark or light mode. But if I wanted to use the second approach, but I wanted to use system preferences to determine what the default value is if the user hasn't made a selection yet, that's kind of the use case for that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So one of those two things has to be the source of truth. You either need to use the system preferences or you need to use the presence or absence of this class name on the top. And I mean, there's certainly ways, like I said, there are a bunch of ways and hacks to work around that. But if you want sort of the best of both worlds, you can say you can send back that class in the HTML based on their system preferences.
What if you, so there's no way to add that special script tag yourself without creating hydration issues? Like, if you just put a script tag in the head, will that still cause a hydration error? I guess it would if you're using Next, because
there is a package called use dark mode. It's Donovan. I can't remember his last name, but everybody in the React world knows Donovan. He's got this use dark mode package that has been working around this issue for, I think, like the last 6 or 7 years. And it works. There's definitely ways to do it. It's just kind of hacky and a lot of client-side shenanigans to make it work without hydration issues.
I wonder if things like Tailwind make this any easier, right? Like, if all of your colors are in variables, you could, in theory, be like, oh, I calculate, I'm flipping some thing, and now I'm all of these variables are set to something else, right? Like, you could render it one way, or you could even reset them with JavaScript.
Yeah, so Tailwind gives you that option too. They ask you, do you want to base it on an HTML class at the top of the tree, or do you want to base it on user preferences? And so it is still an either or situation. Internally, Tailwind is going to just flip a bunch of CSS variables to give you the dark and light colors. And I think the colors are the same, but you just have this dark modifier on each class name. But you effectively have the same issue, right? Like, you still need, as far as implementing the toggle switch, you still need to be able to read from either the class name or from user preferences, but you have to pick one.
Does that mean you're pro Tailwind?
Toggle switch. I'm sorry?
Does that mean you're pro Tailwind?
Men, you are really looking for the hot takes.
Hey, Ben brought it up.
Well, I just, man, nothing gets people riled up like
bingo.
Tailwind, and I will never, for the life of me, understand why. But I think Tailwind's a great tool. I like
Yeah.
it. I'm not anti-Tailwind. I'm not a Tailwind fanboy, but I'm not anti-Tailwind. I think it is a fantastic tool that has its own trade-offs. And what I think big Tailwind fans miss is the fact that the Tailwind team itself acknowledges those trade-offs and has built a ton of really great tooling to compensate for those trade-offs. So it's not controversial to say there are pros and cons to Tailwind. Tailwind developers know that they've built tools to deal with that. So I think that's just like a pretty
You,
reasonable take
Yeah.
on.
I mean,
you're,
it's
you're in a pro Tailwind room right now. So.
No, it's and that's fine. Like I use it at work. We use it at work.
I-
I've used it on personal projects. It allows for.
We don't have to go. Yeah.
I said pros and cons.
To
There's
be-
a lot
to
of
be
pros,
clear,
right?
To be clear, I am pro Atomic CSS, and Tailwind is like the most common Atomic CSS right now. Like if I was making a really small app that I was just maintaining by myself, it would still be Atomic CSS, but it might not be Tailwind. It might be something like, smaller or bespoke, made by myself. But
I don't have time to make bespoke things anymore. I'm not about that life. No,
I
Tailwind.
don't have time to make small projects for myself either.
Tailwind's great. I think it's a great tool. I think that they've continued to make it better. The community around it has made a lot of really awesome tools for Tailwind too. It's just a really powerful tool. And
What's
so
your biggest
I
trade-off?
appreciate that.
What's your biggest trade-off with Tailwind that, like, if you had to tell somebody what you think the biggest con is?
So like one of the things, like I mentioned that with a lot of the cons, the Tailwind team has built tooling to deal with these cons. Like one of the cons with Atomic CSS in general is that you have, a million different classes you have to memorize to figure out what they actually do, right? Like, so you have to like memorize this new syntax for things that you otherwise probably already know, because in CSS they're pretty, you know the CSS. So like, or ideally, the CSS. So now I have like two conventions to remember. I have two syntaxes to remember. And so when I'm working in Tailwind, like especially at the very beginning when I first started using it, I just had the Tailwind docs open at all times, and I'm constantly going back to like, how do you do this CSS thing in Tailwind, and what is the Tailwind way of doing this thing? And sometimes the Tailwind way of doing things can be really frustrating. Like if you're working with CSS Grid, for example, the syntax for trying to produce like specific custom grids in CSS, to do that in Tailwind, the quote unquote Tailwind way, is kind of a nightmare. And so like they don't even give you I don't think they have utilities for defining custom grid areas. I might be wrong, but at least in the beginning they didn't. And that's probably fine, because another problem with, I think, Tailwind is that, or I'm sorry, another problem with, I think, people that use Tailwind is that when you're using Tailwind, you have this kind of obsession of doing everything the Tailwind way. And it's
that's
still
everything.
producing CSS, right? Like you can still just write some CSS occasionally, and that's kind of okay, right? Like, so don't be afraid to actually get in your CSS file if the Tailwind way if it gets in your way, right?
Sometimes it's hard to bridge the gap between business objectives and tech implementation, and it can get messy. This dot is trusted by top names like Meta, Google, and T-Mobile, and they love helping business leaders fulfill their strategic digital initiatives. Check them out at thisdot.co. One more time, that's thisdot.co.
It's like Ben, being so excited about RxJS and telling everybody about RxJS. And now every time you talk to him, it's like, don't use RxJS. So you're gonna, like, a few years later, you're gonna have the Tailwind guys just going, stop using Tailwind.
No. So like the whole thing with the Tailwind way, like the truth is, if you work like Angular, React, or anything like RxJS, the masses, the people, the good people of the earth, the salt of the earth developers are looking for the Tailwind way, the RxJS way, the Angular way. They all want to be spoon-fed the way, and they think they come up with these things based off of examples they see on the internet, and they're like, this is the way. This is the only way. Right. And the truth of the matter is, if it works, you can maintain it and you can test it. It's correct. I don't give a crap what it looks like, as long as all of those needs are met. Like, I don't care what it's made with, or if it's the way or not, like, it's done.
Yeah. And as a React person, like I've learned this lesson the hard way with React so many times. Like it's the same thing. Like, how do I do this the React way? How do I satisfy React's like paradigm and opinions on things? And sometimes you spend so much time trying to figure that out that you forget to even go back to the basics and look like, what is the web way? Like, what are the web APIs that would enable me to do this thing? And that's going back to the topic at hand. Like, that's another reason I really enjoy learning about new web APIs, because oftentimes you can solve your problems with way less code, with way less complexity, by just reaching for web APIs for things that otherwise seem really complicated.
Where do you poke on the latest web APIs? Do you go to like web.dev to figure out all the experimental funness?
Web.dev is fantastic. I also follow a lot of the people who publish to web.dev on Twitter, a lot of, especially in the CSS space. Got people like Jay Hay and Adam Argyle always promoting these really bleeding edge changes in CSS that enable so much stuff. So like, following the right people and just sort of staying tuned to what they're saying. People who work on the specs are really good to follow. Sometimes it gets a little academic, so it's nice to find people who can take the academic stuff and present it in a very practical way. I think that's, like, in particular, those two I mentioned, Jay Hay and Adam Argyle, are very good at that kind of thing, just like presenting actual demos. Una is another one. Sorry, I don't remember everyone's last names, but
Kravitz.
Yeah, there you go. Still never met her, actually. I'd like to change that at some point, because
She's
I've
super
followed
nice.
her online forever.
I DM her all the time when I'm like, wait, does CSS have a way to do this yet? Or is that usually it's like I'm looking to see if there's anything coming down the pipe for something particular in CSS. Like, for example, anchoring like a tooltip next to something such that when the viewport changes, it moves to where it needs to be.
Stoked about that new API too.
That doesn't exist yet, but it's coming. And like, I can't tell you how many times I've had to write the logic to do that in my 20+ year career, and thought to myself, why the hell am I doing this? The operating system knows how to do this. Like, clearly Chrome knows how to do this. Like, why, why am I doing
Well, for the people who are, again, another hot take. I'm all about the hot takes today. Yes, Chance. But if we don't if we're not on Twitter, because we've all abandoned Twitter, then what, web.dev?
Web.dev's great. Also, just following random projects where you see people working on these, like, all the specs happen in the open, right? You can just go on GitHub and read specs for new APIs. You can go to like any web spec, whether it's CSS, JavaScript. All of this discussion happens in the open, which is really great. So, like I said, it can get pretty academic at times and get into the weeds, and it's hard sometimes to pull back and like see the big picture. But yeah, if you can learn to do that, it's really, really useful. But one of the projects that I follow that I really enjoy is OpenUI, which is actually where the popover API that you mentioned, Ben, that's where that originated. They also have originated the select menu API, which is kind of like a new version of select that allows you greater amount of customization. So a lot of new APIs are coming out of OpenUI. Very much worth following that.
Nice.
Yeah. A tip that I would have for people that are watching this too is let's just say that you like, because some of those people are like, well, where did Chance even learn about that? Where did, like, honestly, if just going through your engineering career in general, every time you go to do something, even if it's in a way that you've done it 100 times before, look at it and just assume that there's a better way to do it. And then ask yourself, all right, if I had to figure out the better way to do this, like, what would I search for? And then search. And sometimes you find out there isn't a better way to do it. But other times you'll find out interesting related information, and you'll probably still keep your implementation of whatever you did. But like, one of the ways that I learn things personally that are like new to me is I just assume my code is trash and that there's probably a better way to do it. And then I go and I look, and I find out, oh, there's this new API that does exactly what I want to do, and then I find out it's experimental and it doesn't exist yet, and I have to keep with my whatever my thing is, or I find out some related thing or some other useful tidbit of information. But yeah, just staying curious and staying with the realization that there's probably a better way to do what you're doing with some trade-offs, and then researching it constantly is a good idea, because it's always moving underneath your feet. So,
I mean, I also learn a lot from coworkers too. Like, you submit a PR, like, experience just brings a lot of these things. You submit a PR, somebody looks at it and says, hey, did you know you could do it this way? I didn't now. So yeah, just experience too. Contributing to open source is another great one, especially if you're new to the workforce and you don't have as much exposure for as far as your coworkers are concerned. You can go into just start contributing to open source, like submitting PRs to random projects, and even if it's small things, right? Like uh, you can just learn a lot by reading open source too. Like that's honestly, before I even contributed to open source, I learned so much about how to build React components by reading the Reach UI source code. Way before I was a maintainer and a contributor, I was just really in love with that library. I used it a lot, but then I realized it was missing some core components that I needed. And so but I wanted to build components the same way that they were building components. So I went into the source code and read how it was done. And I learned a lot that way too. So just reading and being active on open source is also a really great way to learn about these things. One of the things I love about open source is because it's open, it's a just highly underutilized learning material all over the place.
Yeah. Well, so Chance, as we wrap up, what are you excited about this year?
Man, I'm excited about a lot of things. I'm excited about in the React world, RSC being kind of, it feels like the last few years there's been a lot of hype around the coming of RFC or RSC, and then finally the implementation and next. But now seeing you've got Parcel starting to integrate RSC into Parcel, you've got Remix starting to explore how that's going to look in the Remix side of things. You have these different takes on how to implement it, and they're going to look radically different, I think. But I think that's also really great. Like it gives us way more options on the server side in React. So I'm really excited to see all of those implementations flesh out and see what it actually enables to do, because I do believe the APIs and the possibilities with RSC are still yet to be determined. I'm really excited to see how that plays out. I'm really excited about CSS. CSS was kind of my first love as a front end guy, and sort of took a backseat to React and JavaScript as I went into deep open source world. And now I'm sort of coming back out and really getting excited about newer CSS APIs and just really embracing how much code that lets us delete. All like you said, Ben, all of the wild stuff we had to do to get popovers positioned correctly. Like the fact that we would just be able to get rid of all that, pretty awesome, you know?
Yeah.
And there's so many examples of stuff like that that are just now like things that were endlessly complex are now totally trivial with new CSS features.
Context menus and accordions and there's
view transitions APIs, like the fact that you can now sort of simulate a spa without actually building a spa, pretty cool. So single page application. Sorry.
Do you remember the ActiveX ones that only worked on like IE4? They do like they'd have like these like overlays, like the blinds, they'd go like this, or they would like swipe up.
Oh yeah, I do remember that.
I brought that up the other day.
Chance was going to say, "You're too old. I do not remember that."
I wasn't a developer at the time, so I don't remember it. Like I never implemented any of it. But I remember experiencing it as a user.
I was 6 months
I used
old.
it in middle
No,
school.
I'm just kidding.
I don't remember who it was. I think it's one of the Asper guys or something. I was on Twitter and someone's like, "Oh, look at this new transitions thing." And just being snarky, I was like, I could do this 20 years ago. And then you go and you look in the MDN document, the documentation on Microsoft still exists, and it's wildly outdated and it doesn't work anywhere anymore. But like, you can go and be like, oh yeah, look, on page transition, it looks at this meta tag, and then you do like this crazy.
I think somebody did that on one of Adam's tweets a while ago. Adam Argyle, he tweeted something about a new CSS feature and doing like infinite scrolling ticker or something, and someone was like, why don't you just use a marquee? Like, I could do this 20 years ago. Like, I guess. Like, sort of. Not really.
That's the first thing I ever did as a programmer at work was make a thing. Do you remember the window.status bar? So so it still exists. You can find window.status, but I had to do this thing where I had to make text that go in that window.status bar to say that the deals of the day on this e-commerce site, and it would tick across, right? And that was when I learned about cent interval. Like I had no idea what I was doing. I'm like, I don't know, like, how do I figure this out? And then I figured it out, and they're like, whoa, I can't believe you did that. I thought for sure that, I think they were trying to get me fired. That's what they're trying to do.
We're going to give him an impossible task that he cannot complete so we can get rid of him.
Yeah.
Well, Chance, what are you doing this year? Where do we find you hanging out?
Yeah, so I am building a course. I started building it a couple years ago and then kind of pressed pause because life got in the way. But I'm back on my course train. It's called Front to Back, and it is specifically geared for front-end developers who are interested in learning about and getting comfortable in the back end. So people like
Cool.
myself, basically.
Yes.
I started out very much as a front-end focused person, and at a certain point realized that that was severely limiting me and wanted to expand my horizons, and learned a lot over the years, and then hoping to build a course for people like that who want to dive into become that quote unquote full stack developer, or at least get comfortable working with and exposed to backend code. So very much excited about building that out, working on a module on servers right now. So really excited about that. And I don't know, conferences this year, got a few of them. I know Adam wants me to go to Render ATL, so I'm going to try and go hang out with Adam again this year in Atlanta. Going to try, definitely going to React Miami in a few months. Just bought my tickets to that. Be my first conference as an attendee in a while. I'm pretty excited to not have to put together a talk, so it'll be fun. And I don't know, maybe a couple more. We'll see. But excited to get some snowboarding in this year. Got an Icon pass, so excited to use that.
Yeah.
And I got engaged, so that's
Congrats.
So we're now in wedding planning mode. So
Yeah.
that's taken up
Congrats.
a big part of
So
my
you
life.
are younger than you look.
No, I just waited way too long. We've been together for like 7 years, so I just am very slow.
Yeah.
I told a bunch of people, and they're like, "I thought you were already engaged. What are we doing here?"
Just making it official. Yeah.
That's funny. That's funny.
Yeah, big year.
Oh, well, congrats. Are you getting married soon?
No, I don't think that's even possible anymore. You got to book venues like a year out. I'm learning a lot about the wedding industry that I also have. I have some hot takes on the wedding industry if you want to do a side podcast about that. But no, we're probably looking at spring next year.
Nice. Cool. We're invited, right? Just kidding.
Sure, we'll see about that.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for listening. You can follow Ben on Twitter at Ben Lesh, Adam at Adam Rackis, myself at Lady Leet, and then Chance is Chance the Dev. Right. So we hope to see you soon, and let us know what you think of this episode. And I don't know.
Thanks, guys.
See you later.
Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Before we get back to our conversation, we wanted to say thank you to This.Labs, who is the sponsor of today's show. If you need help with a project that has failed to deliver on time, or are in need of a team that feels true ownership over your engineering projects, definitely hit up This.Labs. They specialize in helping business leaders ensure their strategic digital initiatives stay on track. Trusted by companies like PlayStation, Capital One, Herman Miller, PayPal, and T-Mobile, you can find them at this.co. That's THISDOT.co. Now, let's return to our show.